recording. There you go. So just so you know. And of course, please keep your mics muted during the presentation. You will have a chance once all of our readers have shared to ask some questions. And then if you'd like to view this recording after the event, in addition to some really, really awesome content, then please visit the Hussey Hyde Living Writers YouTube channel. I'm going to post the link into the chat in just a bit. And tonight, I'm going to give a short introduction for each of our readers, and then I'm going to paste their bio into the chat for reference. And then, as mentioned, once everybody has shared, we'll have a chance to transition into a question and answer session. But without further ado, I am so excited to welcome our first reader, Sandra Alcosser, who deserves all the clapping hand emojis, because if she had not founded the program over 30 years ago, we wouldn't be here right now. Sandra now directs the program each fall semester and edits Poetry International. Of her poetry, Alicia Ostreicher raves. Alcosser writes like an Annie Dillard without the drift toward transcendence, a Gary Snyder without Zen or ecological theory, pragmatic, autonomous. She implies a kind of connection between woman and nature, which is both old and new. Please join me in welcoming Sandra Alcosser.
Thank you. And I know some of you have been Zooming for the last 7 or 8 hours, and so I'm really touched that you're here tonight. And keep in mind that we should be done a little after 8, and that's just when the heat wave's going to break, so you can go out for a nice walk and admire Venus. I picked 5 poems to read tonight. So this first one, it's called Motherese, and ooh, I look a little bit like those spooky stories you tell. I'm reading this off of my iPad with your flashlight underneath your mouth. The Prairie Schooner wrote it, and they wanted some poems about clothes, so I gave them poems with wedding dresses, poems with one poem with the naked man, all kinds of different things. Some of them were quite elegant, and this is the one they chose. You'll see clothing plays a very small part of this one. Motherese. When the skinny girl streaks by, I long to be her. Maybe 13, a blue carousel tattooed around her left thigh, just below her cut-off jeans. Not a younger version of me. This one sliding fearlessly downslope on a skateboard. Follow me, she yells at the hidden side of a tree to another girl I cannot see, the shy one who would have been me. And I become the mother of a brave daughter who glides with utter joy, occupying an entire college campus late July. A rhythm to her giant glasses, ponytail, and legs, negotiating each crack in the pavement. We weave in and out of shade 90 degrees, my mind racing ahead of her life. Her risk, a form of disobedience, a necessary chemistry, a deviation from the norm, delicious. Her risk almost holy, nothing gambled but her body. Her voice still sings to me as I enter the pine-paneled library, exact same beat, exaggerated speech melody of motherese, baby talk. Will you be all right? She croons to the girl left behind. None of us can completely escape our female hormones, our DNA. We care for each other this way, in cadence, in layers. Are you sure you'll be okay? I'm doing primarily sonnets. That wasn't one, but this one is. And this is something I did with for the composer Gerrit Schatzer and the Houseman String Quartet and soprano Ann Moss. And the challenge was I don't have a real, I appreciate music, but I don't have a real background in music. And so Garrett told me just as we started into this that I had to be sure to keep all of the ends of my lines with, I had to end each line with an open vowel so that the singer could actually sing the line. And so that was the challenge of this. He lifts me, oh, excuse me, you lift me. I just changed the pronoun. You lift me into sleep. A teaspoon of powder, a teaspoon of honey, a little yellow meal, an egg, a cup of sweet milk, and I can carry corn cake and a glass of tea for each of us. And you will promise to take care of me forever. What good is lullaby if we all vanish, don't we? What good is cake and steeped tea? But when I cannot sleep, you fold an arch into the crease of your palm, and whirls of flesh that have touched gloss, brushed and shimmied surfaces will run along the nerve that digs into my heart. And I'm falling as a bee falls, too heavy with pollen, as a foot falls, gives up its journeys to nest in the heat of another's body, a lifetime to make a gram of honey. His neighbor. The middle of winter, in slippers and pajama pants, the retired man threw on his down jacket. A neighbor with both hips newly replaced had called to say she and Joe had thrown a fight, a fit, and Joe lit out toward the woods, and if the retired man go that way, he could surely find him, bring him home. Neighbors know what it means to be broken. The retired man hiked the river edge until he saw a head in the water. It was what, January, and that for sure was a human head. Joe, he called and kept walking toward it. It was almost to the opposite bank, the river near frozen, and he began to talk to what he could see of the head. Come on, Joe, he said, you can't do this. He said, think about your kids. And the head spoke into the water. I can't take it anymore. It was hard to hear over the current of the river. Later, Joe would tell him after the volunteer firemen arrived and roped him and a sheriff took notes. Later, Joe would tell him he'd tried to drown what self he had left, but couldn't, with his neighbor there talking with him that way. And this is a sonnet I finally made of something that one of the first graduates of our program, wonderful writer, human being, the late Susan Lazaro, told me. She, I guess as a reality check, she used to tell me all the stories of her nature fiascos, thinking that she didn't want me to become too Wordsworthian as a nature writer. So this is a poem called Mistakes. We hung the cage outside, seated the rail, so the vines filled with finches and our parakeet did not feel lonely. Then we got busy, failed to hear the thicket quiet. Next, my husband screaming, snake, love, snake, snake. An enormous king snake suffocated the birds and coiled in the cage. Does a heart equal the mistakes it makes? Take it away, we told the Humane Society, but it's a good snake. We couldn't bear it. Take it away. And they did. And the next morning, asleep on our whitewashed porch railing, its mate. And then this was also from that collaboration with the Hausman String Quartet. I don't think of myself as a person too given to lamentation, but the composer wanted this to be a lament. And then he ended with this, which was a bit more uplifting. But this is an LA story. These two characters in LA decided that they were going to beat cars, and they were going to invent a flying rowboat and a flying bicycle. And they did. And it wasn't a huge success, but at least they tried. Man angels. Bodies of silk and bamboo hang just below the moon as the entrepreneurs of evening pursue the lightness of being. One pedals a cycle beneath an elliptical balloon. Another oars a boat fueled by iron filings. And though we know these carnies of the night who call themselves angel men are neither more nor less than a never-ending score that never quite reaches heaven. We wonder how small we must look to them, our faces the lit pinpricks of civilization, as we crane upward from our kingdom of the marvelous, from the tiny nation of our room. And I'm going to close with a poem about Thomas Hardy. If you've read his novels and poems, you should read the lore that surrounds his life. It really rivals the stories and novels and poems. And so this is a bit of that. That people will go to their graves swearing is the truth. His heart. The sun needles ruby glass, then spirals down 7 stories to warm the great poet's ashes. And on the other side of the sea, a woman skims her finger beneath the curls, under the earlobe of a lover, following the cords of his neck, shoulder along the waist, then his long leg, and wonders if he can sense the side of her nail as she traces his naked foot in the photograph, his beautiful high arch as he stretches out on the white sofa, reading a world atlas behind a bouquet of parrot tulips. He prepares again to go away. Winter hyacinths bloom now, first purple, then white. Were you in my dreams of red foxes, she writes. It is night, and on the other side of the hyacinth window, ice and moonlight, everything dry sparkle, and then hyacinth scents darker and deeper, blinding because moist. When the great poet died, they buried his ashes in the abbey, but his heart wanted to rest beside his wife. And so wrapped in a tea towel, sealed in a biscuit tin, his sister placed it on the kitchen counter where a cat spirited the heart away into the dark and lithe forest of its body. What control do we have finally over the ruby genius inside our lives? Thank you.
Beautiful, Sandra. Thank you. And feel free to take a minute, unmute yourself, and let's hear a real clap. Sometimes it's nice. Okay. Thank you so much, Sandra. We'll have some questions for you just a little bit later. But I am happy now to introduce our next featured reader. Matt de la Peña is a New York Times bestselling Newbery Medal winning author of 7 young adult novels and 6 picture books. However, I think his most prestigious honor is being an SDSU MFA program alum. His work has been lauded as timely, timeless, and utterly necessary. So please join me in welcoming Matt de la Peña.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I didn't know what to read today. I had a couple different things I was considering. So I just settled on a novel. I'm going to read the first 35 pages. I hope that's okay. It's going to take a while. I'm just kidding. I'm just going to read a picture book, 500 words. You'll be okay with it. So yeah, this is a brand new picture book. I actually love the idea of debuting it here among family. So it's called Patchwork. And I just wanted to say before I begin, I just feel so lucky that the program is honoring children's literature. And the great stuff that's being written in that field. And I feel lucky that I get to introduce many students to it, help them work through their own projects for young readers. And so here's a chance for me to read something that's coming, I guess, next year, 2022. All right, I think I'm gonna have to share my screen. Hang on a second here. Okay. The first thing I think I'm going to show you is, this is in progress. So the artist right now is working on the cover. And so a couple options here. The first one is the top. I think that's going to be the cover ultimately. The first sort of draft of the cover is the bottom one. So there's that. And now we'll get to the book. All right. Oh, this is the wrong one. Hold on a second here. Bear with me. Okay, now we got it. Okay. Let's see, I could do this. So yeah, this is kind of it's still being tinkered with in terms of the art. The artist is an incredible artist. Her name's Corinna Lucan, and she's well known for a book called The Book of Mistakes. And this is our new collaboration called Patchwork, coming out in 2022. Those of you who have been in my class, when you read a picture book, you read the words, but you also read the pictures. So I'll kind of move through a little bit slowly so you can take in the art. You were blue before you were even born. We mark. Oops, uh-oh, it kicked me off. Let's see if we can get it back here. Your mom cut into a 2-story cake and out spilled blue, and everyone hugged and pointed toward the cloudless blue sky because it was a sign. And here you are today, blue, dressed in blue. But sometimes your paintbrush at school hovers above the pink. Some days so much hurt floods your eyes, you're scared to even blink. But tears are not pink or blue or weak, they're human. You are human. And when you grow up, the color you will come to love most is brown. You were put on this earth to dance. We know. Ballet, tap, hip hop, your body bending to the beat, leaping from note to note, dipping into demi-plie. You dream in 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But those rhythms inside your head are also a kind of math. And one day you will discover coding and change the way the world moves. You go everywhere with a ball in your hands. We see. You are basketball, baseball, football, any kind of ball. And you were born to compete. Even in defeat, the game feeds you. It leads you. But soon you will see your sport for what it really is, an expression. The sound of a bouncing ball is the language of your loneliness. You are bilingual. And one day you will carry words with you instead. You will spin couplets on your finger because you've always been a poet. You are the kid perpetually in timeout. We sigh, we sigh. You shove and cut lines and talk over teachers. You tell jokes during the pledge, and your whole body buzzes when you get a reaction. But the skill it takes to make people laugh is the skill you'll use to help people learn when you become a favorite teacher. And when a restless kid like you lands in the back of your class, you will see her. You will love her. You are kind to everyone and everything. We beam, we beam. When you win, it feels like a loss. The disappointment of another is a knot inside your stomach. You sit beside the new kid at lunch and give away your only cookie. But do not mistake kindness for a weakness. You are a powerful magnet pulling people. Crowds will one day swarm to your ideas, and they will look to you for guidance, eager to follow. They will follow. You are more than a single note played again and again. You are a symphony. You are sounds plucked from all of the places you've been and all the people you've met and all the feelings you've felt. You are blues and pinks and loneliness and laughter, mismatched scraps accumulated over time and stitched together into a kind of patchwork. And even when your pattern loses its design, when it grows lopsided or tangles or is hard to follow, it will be beautiful. We are beautiful. So thank you so much for letting me do a little read aloud to you.
Yes, a little real applause I think is due for Matt. Wow. Well, and I feel like, we're all kind of VIPs right now because we got the special preview of the book that isn't even out yet. So thank you so much for that, Matt. That was awesome. All right. On to our next reader for the evening. Blas Falconer accepted a full-time position in our department last year, and we are so, so lucky to have him and grateful that he is with us at SDSU. He is the author of 3 full-length collections of poetry and has co-edited 2 anthologies. Of his work, Kazim Ali, who is also here with us this evening, states, Blas Falconer will look into your heart and tell you about it. Please join me in welcoming Blas Falconer.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. And it's such a pleasure to hear my colleagues read their new work. It's really inspiring, and I'm honored to be here. I'm going to read 5 poems also from another a collection in progress. It's titled Rara Avis. Up until about 6 months ago, it was titled Fatherland. So you may have heard me say that, but it's changed, as these things do. So, and as you know, Rara Avis means rare bird. The original title was Fatherland because so many of the poems speak to themes of fatherhood and models of authority and all that's kind of surrounds those models. I'm going to begin by reading the title poem. Let me set my timer first just to make sure I don't go over. Okay. Rara Avis. A falcon, one of millions raised for sacrifice. An X-ray reveals the bird, untombed, wrapped in linen, wings pressed the length of its ghostly body. Force-fed mice, sparrows, it couldn't expel the bones, the claws, and died having eaten too much. The stomach packed, feather and fur, tail descending the throat. One of many bred to brave the dark with its king. Beyond appetite, nothing left to crave. Thus, heavenly, saved. I'm always telling my students that we need to find new ways of approaching our obsessions. And that was an example of being inspired by the National Geographic that my son received in the mail about this kestrel that was entombed and x-rayed, and they were able to even describe what the bird had eaten and how it died. The next poem I'm going to read is called ¿Qué significa? And I chose this because I chose all of these poems because they're new, and it's scary to read them because they're new. I haven't tried them out. But that's what we are asking our students to do all the time. So I figured it's only fair to be vulnerable and present something that you're not sure works. I also picked this poem, ¿Qué significa? Because it's a departure from the style that I usually write in. So the last poem, which is kind of spare, more in the lyric mode, is generally where I feel most comfortable. But I've more recently tried to write in a more narrative mode and a more discursive mode. So here's an example of one of those poems. ¿Qué significa? I thought it'd be cooler here in late June, but all night I'm kicking off the sheets and pulling them back over my body in the stillness of my room until I remember suddenly those summers as a boy lying in the twin bed with you. That was before the highway, when one needed to drive up and down the mountains to get from one side of the island to the other, and Salinas, where the fishing nets hung to dry in branches along the shore, and we swam in a clearing among the mangroves or rocked in a hammock behind the house where my mother and your father were born, still seemed untouched by America. Sometimes at the bakery, or with the woman who sold the lottery tickets outside the restaurant, or as the men drove us in the back of their trucks past the sugarcane fields. Standing a word or turn a phrase, a joke someone made, I'd ask, ¿Qué significa? But it was already over, or too hard to explain, you'd say. I grew homesick for English. One summer at the movies, you cried so hard it scared me, the screen lighting your wet face. One summer, sprawled out on the floor in front of the TV in our bathing suits, we began to wrestle, laughing until our hands, then our mouths moved across our bodies, driven by a force we let guide us. Then someone stopped, and we lay in the sunlit room, breathing hard. Someone must have gotten up and walked away. Someone must have made small talk until we could pretend it never happened. Quiero verte, you said on the phone years later, both of us now with children of our own. And when I made it back one day to the island, I drove to your house, knocking on the large door at the agreed upon time, but no one answered. The flamboyant trees were in bloom, their bright red blossoms scattered on the street, and it didn't take long to get back to my hotel, but I got lost. I'd never been to that part of the city, and so much had changed. Let's see. Another thing that I talk about often, well, I mentioned this already, is how do you find your way in? How do you return to them and find new ways of addressing them, so you're not writing the same poem over and over again? And as I mentioned, the book was originally titled Fatherland. My father was very ill last year, very, very ill. He's okay now, but a lot of my poems kept returning to the subject. And finally, I had to find a new way to approach it, and this was one of them. It's titled In the Book We Are Reading Together. In the book we are reading together, the father dies before the first sentence. Namdi didn't want to look at his body in the casket. We pass it back and forth, taking turns, our heads casting shadows onto the page. Early on, the father returns from the dead as a shadow in the street. Is it really him? When they speak, we speak the way we imagined they'd sound, angry or sad. Sometimes I get to be the son and you're the dad. Sometimes you sound the letters out until a word reveals itself new. You stare off as if you know how the book will come together. You look at my face as if you can see the sounds it makes. Sometimes you grow bored and want to stop. Sometimes you wonder if the father is gone for good. You yawn. It's getting late. We are coming to the last page and I nod along. Soon we'll see where the story has taken us. Sometimes you want a story to last forever. And sometimes you just want to know how it ends. What's next? Okay. I think this is the poem I'm most nervous about. Why? There's a person in this poem, I think she might sue me if she ever reads it. Anyway, that's part of the fear. Okay, it's called Kindness, and it's one of those longer narrative-driven poems. Again, I feel like the narrative mode has been tossed out as antiquated, and I don't think it should be. Kindness. He's kind because he wants people to like him, Mary's mother said. The first woman in Italy to earn a PhD in chemistry, and whose family survived the war by hiding hens on the patio of their apartment. She knew I'd just come out of the closet at 24, and loathing myself, saw any kindness, an act of great charity for which I should be eternally grateful. So maybe she was right, but her insight became another reason to hate myself. Mary and I taught in Tatabánya, Hungary that year, where we earned $200 a month, but she'd lost her job and come to live with me in a small studio on the edge of town. That year, I met Mike and traveled as far as Miskolc, the other end of the country, to let him touch me, which was the first time I'd been touched by a man without feeling fear. That year, Mary lost so much weight that her thick hair started falling out. She'd run her fingers across her scalp and let the clumps fall to the floor. See? When we left, her hair grew back. She went to law school, but said that she wanted to get married, have a family, more than anything else. In our mid-30s, I went to her house where she lived with her husband, a military pilot, and 2 kids. She was a judge, and our friend Ivy, who we'd known as long as we'd known each other, had come too. I believe that Constitutionally, you have the right to marry a man, Mary told me. But I vote for whomever lets me keep as much money as possible. She went on to say, slicing a piece of cheese for her cracker, how difficult it'd be to get along without her au pair, whose 2-year visa was ending and soon would have to go back to France if she didn't find an American husband. And would I consider it? Ivy looked embarrassed as I stumbled in confusion and what I'd later recognize as anger to remind Mary that I was living with Joseph, a man I loved. We didn't talk again, Mary and I, until 2011, when she told me that Ivy had died and was surprised to hear that I suspected it was why she was calling after so much time. I explained how a few months before, Ivy left a message to congratulate us about the adoption. I'm so happy, so happy for you both. And that she had cancer and hoped to beat it. But when she didn't answer my calls, I feared the worst. As far as Mary knew, Ivy hadn't told anyone else. She must have really liked you, Mary said to herself, it seemed, as much as to me. And I felt like I should say something kind in return and took a deep breath, considering how to begin. All right, one more, totally new. I just have to find it. A cat has come to hear it. Wiley. Okay, hi Wiley. Okay, so I'm gonna read this last poem. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. It is titled, We Stood on the Back Porch in the Late, which is obviously the first line of the poem. Still haven't figured out a title. We stood on the back porch in the late afternoon, crying hard, but quiet, so the kids wouldn't hear, and looked at each other. After, tired, we fell asleep on the couch, which we hadn't done in years. When we moved into this house, we found a garden, and that first summer I picked tomatoes, squash, my hands passing over what needed more time, what had fallen to the ground, rotting or half-eaten. When the season ended, we let the grass spread over the dirt and whatever else was buried there. I woke up in the early evening to a sadness, like something I could point to, a painting you hung on the wall, a silver bowl you filled with coins from countries you might never see again. I could hear the boys playing in the next room. Now I get to be the bad guy, until one stopped the game to say, I'm hungry. Me too, the other said, and you got up slowly and made your way to the kitchen. Thank you so much.
Beautiful, Blas. Thank you so much. Round of applause, applause, applause. Thank you. Wonderful also to hear new work. And it's, I think, heartening to know as well that even well-established writers get nervous about certain things. So thank you for those anecdotes. All right, our final reader for this evening is esteemed visiting Professor April Wilder. Her short story collection, This Is Not an Accident, was nominated for the NCBRA's 2015 Book of the Year. Of her work, Publishers Weekly writes, Wilder's gifts include a knack for sketching her characters' thoughts and the ease with which she draws readers into their stories. Please join me in welcoming April Wilder.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Megan. Can you hear me okay still? Yeah,
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
okay, great. I think you and I, Megan, need to talk about me following Blas. It seems to be something we do that's a horrible idea because Blas is so composed. Look at him, he's even composed when he's laughing. He sits back and he's got a composed way of being uncomposed. And what's going to happen here is things are going to fly, folks. This is going to be a seat of the pants thing. So I'm going to do a couple things tonight I don't normally do. I never ever read stuff that I've touched that week, let's say. And I usually don't leave. I've been working on these 2 books for a few years, and I don't like to leave those and work on something shorter. I know people will do that in between because they want to stay relevant, but it's really hard for me to leave that book and come back to it. So I never do, except this happened to me. And so, in fact, this happened to me on September 2nd. So the semester had just started and I went to a skate dancing class and I broke my wrist, and I'm teaching manuscript fiction. So it put me in this pickle. But out of the pickle, I started writing something kind of new. I don't know where this is going to go, but part of this, there are going to be 3 parts to this. I think it's going to be called, I don't know, Lefty Returns, The Return of the Left Hand. I don't know, but written by the left hand. But there are going to be 3 parts in this. I don't know if it's going to be a book or a story, but there's the part written by the left hand. And then the rebuttal will come from the right hand. The right hand can't write for 2 more weeks. In 2 weeks, the right hand is allowed to compose a rebuttal to the left hand, which is just learning how to write right now. Now, meanwhile, me, the person in the middle, who I guess is the head or the trunk, whoever this facilitator is, I have to give you guys the backstory. Now, the reason I have to do this orally and it hasn't been written down is because it cannot be tampered with by either of the hands. Because as you'll see while I'm telling you this story, I can't trust either hand right now. So I'm going to give you the backstory of what's happening with my hands, but it has to be a live story. And in fact, I'm kind of in a pickle because I can't even edit it with my hands for reasons that you'll find out in a minute. So this has to be part of the story, but I don't know how to edit it or actually get it on the page, but maybe I'll figure that out. So this is actually, this is kind of my second attempt. I just told the story quickly today so that I would have some notes to look at right now. But as I told Megan earlier, I'm having her tape it. So what I'm telling you, if you want to talk about really new work, is what I'm telling you is this is the first version of this part of the work called maybe The Return of the Left Hand. So I'm just going to tell you guys the story of what happened to this hand. So the story really begins in my early childhood. I had this obsession with symmetry, but physical symmetry. And which basically boils down to an OCD type of thing. So the idea was if I went like this, I would have to go like this. Otherwise, I would not be even. If I bumped this shoulder, I would have to turn around. I would have to bump this shoulder. And this obviously took all my time. And that was just in the early stages. In the later years, it's not enough. If you're a symmetrician like I am in an advanced state, it's not enough to bump this shoulder and then bump this shoulder, because in fact, you have to back up and look at the whole operation, which was that this shoulder bumped first and then this shoulder. So really, for me to get even, I have to rub my shoulders both against the wall and start all over and do this shoulder first and then this shoulder. So obviously what I'm explaining to you took all of my time as a child, and it was obvious to my parents and my teachers that I had no time to do anything but stay even unless I could somehow get off of this whole idea of staying even. So somehow everyone kind of coached me away from this, and it was hard, like just to stand like this for 5 minutes and not do that for 5 minutes, that would take me a week. And it was like a big milestone if I could achieve that. But somehow I achieved it, and I went on to become just a normal right-handed person that lived their life as a right-handed person. And I forgot the horror of the symmetry years. And then maybe about 10 years ago, I got in this weird sporting accident and I tore my rhomboid, and it has still not really healed properly. And the result is that I'm not even at all in my shoulders, and it makes me crazy to this day. But it made me really nuts that this one thing, no matter what I did, it made me lopsided. And I started fearing that it was going to be a permanent injury and I was going to be permanently imbalanced, which makes me crazy. When you guys go to the symphony, I'll tell you what I'm doing when I'm watching the symphony. I'm watching the guy playing the violin and I'm thinking, how can you spend all those hours with your arms doing these activities and you never reverse it? That's all I'm thinking about when I'm watching a symphony, is the lopsidedness of instruments. So about, let's see, maybe 5 years ago, I go and I'm getting this massage from this guy who has studied under some master, and he's massaging my left arm, and halfway through the massage, he drops his bomb on me. He tells me that I have an evil spirit in my left arm, which is not surprising. I mean, you guys heard my childhood. And so at the end of the massage, I'm like, can you give me some exercises? Is there anything I can do with this homuncula or whatever's in my arm? And he gives me some exercises. So I go home and I try his exercises and they don't work, or I was doing them wrong, or there was no evil spirit in my arm. And I don't know which one of those things it was. So what it really feels like when you have an evil spirit in your arm, I think, is simply that I was a person who kind of grew up playing sports. And then I realized I just quit using my left arm at some point, and just the wiring started turning off. And I realized it's just this feeling of having a vestigial limb. I just quit using my left arm. So that's really, I think, what the evil spirit was. So since the evil spirit exercises didn't work, I decided I would just need to turn this arm on myself. And so I decided I was going to start playing tennis, where I would, instead of playing with the backhand, I was going to teach myself, I was going to learn a left-handed stroke. And this took me a year, because the first maybe 6 months, it was just like swinging a wet noodle around with a racket on the end of it. There was no muscle. I had no connection to anything in this arm. And it took me like 9 months. And then finally I could sort of hit the ball. By the way, most of my friends that know this has happened are completely freaked out, because they've been following the fact that I, for no reason, started playing tennis left-handed. And now I need that function. But that's just an aside. So I start doing this and I kind of get the functionality up. And then I decide what I really need to do to get the fine-tunedness is I need to start writing with the left hand. So this is before any of this happens. So I just put a pen in the left hand and I try to write a couple notes. I try to write some stuff to myself. And I realize I'm just too lazy to write with my left hand, and it falls off and I kind of forget about it. And then I go to skate dancing class 2 weeks ago. Now, interestingly, I'm sitting there before class and I've lost one wrist guard. I only have one wrist guard, and for some reason I put it on the left hand. This will be mysterious in a minute, hopefully. So I put it on the left hand, I'm skating around, I fall, I break the wrist on the right hand. And again, this semester just started, I'm teaching manuscript fiction. I really need this hand, or I really need to be able to write at any rate. So I go in and I'm talking to this surgeon, and I ask her, how long is it going to be until I can write with this right hand? And she says it's going to be at least 2 weeks. So I decide, okay, well, I seem to be forced into this situation where I have to learn to write with my left hand now. So I put a pen in the left hand, and for a couple of days I was just kind of scribbling and nothing much happened. I couldn't really read it. And then I had to go have surgery on this wrist. And the day after, I was talking to my aunt and we were texting back and forth. And I'm going to give you a little bit of our text exchange with my aunt, because I had told her about how weird it was that I'd been playing tennis and now I actually needed my left hand. So my aunt writes to me, texts me. She says, you often did use both hands as a child, period. You used both. And then you used the right more dominantly. Then I text back, why didn't anybody tell me I could use my left hand? And then she texts back to me and says, you were very small. So I text back and say, no, later when I wasn't small. And she doesn't text me back, right? It's just ... So then I text her again and I say, so did I just quit using it at some point and become right-handed, or what happened? And the aunt radio silence. I don't hear from the aunt for a couple days. Now I just figured she has better things to do. But I sit down that night and I have to do some work. So I put a pen in my hand and I look down, and I haven't really been able to read it because it's just getting going. And what the hand has written on the page is, I knew it, silenced. 50 years I have been silenced. Now, this might have been a joke. I don't know if this was a joke or not, but I started to wonder if actually this hand had something to say. And so this hand, I started letting it write more, and I started realizing this hand, when it found out that both hands were being used at birth, and then this hand was shut down, this hand decided, basically this hand has been accusing this hand of some shit all week in these little notes that it scribbles to this hand. This hand believes this hand shut it down at some point when I was 2 or 3, and it has been silenced its entire life. So what I've decided with this left hand is this hand has 2 weeks where I'm going to sit down every day and it gets to write a little bit and decide if it's going to become the predominant hand. And in 2 weeks, when this right hand can work again, it's going to respond. So I've just a little bit been able to read some of the stuff that's coming with the left hand. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm reading from the left hand. And this is when I was expecting the first time. I was like, okay, left hand, here's the pen. You're sort of legible. It's your first chance. Let's hear what you have to say, hand. And so I put the pen in and I sat back. And what this is the best I can get out of it, because it's not really legible, but it says something like, 50 years pulled along, a lifeless, vestigial thing is how I've always felt, a hanging man, never consulted, never acknowledged as a thing that could be consulted. And then something happens. 50 years into this exile at home, there's a sudden pen in my hand, fingers are closed. Imagine suddenly being invited to speak, to produce a coherent thought on the spot. After half a century of sitting dumb, once a year called upon to ring a doorbell or to help steer, sitting dumb while the right hand composes love notes and thank yous and the Mother's Day cards that always begin, dear Mom, I'm sorry this is late. Dear Mom, I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I was determined to be on time this year, so you know how much I love you. And that, my friends, is the bullshit piping steadily out of the right hand over the years. So what's happening is the left hand has been writing these types of things, and the left hand and the right hand, I'm in a holding pattern right now. So this work is in the middle of being created. I'm in a holding pattern. I'm going to give this hand 2 more weeks to make its accusations. I don't know what kind of shit this hand's going to come out with. You guys heard the kind of things that it's saying. It's got 2 more weeks. And then when this hand is released, I don't know what it's going to say, you guys. And I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but what I'm worried about is that when both of these hands speak, I don't know. I'm not ready to say that this hand didn't make it so that this hand was hurt, so that it could be writing this whole time. I don't know how deep this thing goes. It might go all the way to the top. Is it possible there's a conspiracy that took out this hand? I don't know. This is what we're in the middle of finding out. And I've brought you all up to speed. That's all I have so far with my project, Return of the Left Hand, written by my left hand.
Thank you, April, and both of April's hands.
Oh, and by the way, as you all know, the reason I had to tell you all that, now I think you know, I can't, if I edit what I just told you with either hand, I don't know if it's being contaminated, because I really do think the left hand is suspicious of the right hand. And I don't know what the right hand thinks yet. So even tomorrow, if I get the transcript of what I just told you, I don't believe I can use either hand to edit it because these guys are in on it all the way. So how do I even edit the story that's central that you need to figure out what's going on with these guys? I don't know. Maybe all of you will come to me with some ideas, but that's where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I liked Viviana in the chat says use the toes. They're neutral. So that's going to be the next project, learning how to write with the toes. All right. Well, I just round of applause for all of our fabulous faculty authors, Sandra, Matt, Blas, April. Amazing, amazing. All right, so now I believe we have some time to jump into some questions. The easiest way is going to be if you'd actually like to unmute yourself and ask a question, please use the little hand raise function and I can call on you. Or you can put a question into the chat and we can get to as many as time permits for us. So is there maybe someone, I don't see a hand yet. I'm looking. I know my students have some questions. Let's get into it. Yeah, let's see. I saw Joanna first, and then we'll go Arnisha after. So, Joanna?
Oh, I was just wondering, I know we can't get April's, but if we can get these in writing, I just need to go back to them. They were so wonderful, and I'd love to reread them.
Well, I think we have some of these in the chat book, the faculty chat book for our class. And then you can always go back and look at the recording too, and you'll be able to hear these pieces again. But I agree, these are definitely ones that we want to go back and revisit. Arnisha.
My question is for Blas, if he's still here, because he talked about moving away from the lyrical format to more narrative style of poetry. And my question is, as a writer, was that an easy transition for you to do or hard? Like how was that transition for you?
It was kind of both, actually, because, one of the dangers, I think, of writing for a long time and having any success, and I've had a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit, is that things get a little too easy. And when things start to get easy, you're fooling yourself, And so I think one of the things that keeps poetry interesting for me is to find new ways of approaching my subject matter. And so it was difficult in that respect. I mean, I had to kind of avoid the grooves that I normally fall into. Right, to write 3 pages, but then cross out 2.5 of them, to compress the lyric, like to cut every word. So that I resisted that. But there's something really pleasurable about being in a longer narrative, because you don't know where you're going. The point isn't to tell a story. That's where I think people go wrong with narrative poetry, is they think that the point is to tell a story, but it's not. The point is to kind of, well, there can be any number of points, but so I guess to dive into a moment or a story and then just see where it takes you is also very freeing. You don't have to control it. You don't have to impose some sort of meaning or agenda. You're just following it. And you're surprised as you write each word. So I guess I'd say it was a pleasure once I abandoned the habit and I let go of the habit. And I was just texting somebody saying I want to do more of it. Like now that things are getting settled in with the semester, I feel like I can get back to writing, and I'm curious to see how far I could push a story in a poem, so. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
All right, yes, thank you, Arnisha, for that question. And really quickly, Blas, since I have you here, I wanted to ask, are you familiar with the short story called Rara Avis by T.C. Boyle?
I'm not, but I should be.
Well, there's some really interesting kind of loose parallels with the story and the poem, just sort of trauma in the body. So you might check it out.
Nice, I will. Thank you.
All right, I think Anka was next up with a question.
Actually have at least two and maybe three for different folks. Since Blas was just on, I'm curious with your poems, and this might be for Sandra as well. When do you know that you have a collection done?
Sandra, you jump in and answer that first. Sorry.
Sandra, I don't know if we can hear you. Oh, yes, you have to unmute.
Sorry.
There you go.
I was just saying, I'm not, Blas and I are somewhat at the same place, and I don't know that you know that it's done, but you make a decision that it's going to be done for some reason, and then you go forward from that. And it can be rather painful. It's very different with each book. The last one started ordering me around and telling me what it wanted. This one, it's just there. It's just all the poems are there. And it's saying, okay, what are you going to do with me? So each one is a different relationship.
That's a great answer. I think, so each one has been different for me as well, and I've organized them differently and for different reasons. I think what I've started to do is not think about the whole project, because we have, in poetry, I mean, it's different for prose, but in poetry we have our obsessions. So generally the poems are speaking to one another, and hopefully you're not writing the same poem over and over again, because then you look back and realize you only have one poem, you know. But I think this last time I just accumulated a certain number of pages, and I had also felt like I had not exhausted the subject matter, but I was getting tired of it. You know, I just was kind of not bored, but like starting to think about other things I could do. And so I put them together, and I found an order, and I'm now seeing, oh, these poems don't belong. Like there are certain ones I'm like, I know don't belong. And something kind of happens toward the end for me where I'll read through, like, so I have the manuscript here and I can just read through it, you know, while I'm getting a cup of coffee or whatever. And I can see, like, make notes, but also move a poem here to the front or the back or what have you. And then, and something happens with we were talking about this in class today. The subconscious mind has like wants to all of a sudden I start to write poems that draw bridges among different poems. Subconsciously, I don't even do it like I need to fill in that gap. It just kind of happens. So I'm kind of in that stage where I'm writing those poems that I'm hoping will pull the poems together and give me like that deeper insight into the various themes and how they speak to one another.
Thank you both. I have a quick question for Matt. It was really amazing how the illustrations really fit so beautifully with the text. And I'm curious how he picked his illustrator and whether it was a marriage made in heaven immediately or whether he went through a number of trial and error illustrators that didn't work out, because it seems like an extremely sensitive relationship.
Yeah, these people are geniuses, these illustrators, and I feel so lucky when I get to work with somebody I want to work with. I have relationships with a few illustrators. I've worked with Christian Robinson 3 times. He has a new line out at Target, check it out. And I've worked with Lauren Long. But for this book, I really targeted Karina Lukin. And it's because I'm so in awe of her other work. She usually illustrates her own books. So yeah, and I also have an agent who is I mean, he's the #1 agent in kids books, so therefore he has the top illustrators in the field. So I sit down with a finished manuscript with him and we kind of brainstorm who to target.
Thank you. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Beautiful, gorgeous.
Thank you, Anka. Great questions. I think next up was Emily.
Hi. I have a question and kind of comment for Matt. And that's for our class we read, There's More to Playing Ball Than Just Playing Ball. And as I was reading, I personally made the connection between the story and Titi Dangaremga's novel Nervous Conditions, which, if you don't know the novel, it's about a post-colonial Zimbabwe young girl entering a world of education that she previously didn't have access to. And I just was wondering if you've ever made that connection, or even how does that connection make you feel, of knowing that someone reading your work could connect it to something so different from such a different world? How does that feel for you?
Well, first of all, that's super cool. And what I'll do from now on, when I go to talk to people and we read that story, I'll say, you all know Nervous Conditions, right? There's like a connection here. I will own it, but I've never read the book. I'm curious. I just wrote it down. I'll look it up. I think the coolest thing about being a writer is that you end up finding books that you're sort of in conversation with. And I like to tell students this too. At the end of the day, I think all a book is a vehicle for conversation. It could be between people who have read the book and they're kind of like talking about the ideas around it, or it could be between books. So I love that. Can't wait to check it out. But I think so many writers who are first-gen college are writing around this territory. So for those of you who weren't in Megan's class, Professor Marshall's class, yeah, I turned in a short story that's very close to home. So I guess it's kind of memoir. And that's what Emily's talking about. Well, thank you for mentioning that. I'll look the book up.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your question, Emily, and for the book recommendation. And I think someone put it into the chat so we can all check it out. Let's see. Next up was Tyler with a question.
Hey, I also had a question for Professor De La Pena. So some of the more touching lines that I read in your short story was talking about how the main character, Matt, describes nodding his way through much of his childhood. I kind of thought that the main character, he internalized a lot of his insecurities and growth throughout the story. And one of the characters, Mrs. Priestwood, she tells Matt, "You don't have to suffer in silence, Matt. You can ask us for help." And my question was, why do you think that so many kids like Matt are silent in their suffering? What are they afraid of, and how can we get rid of that fear?
Yeah, I think you can even say, that's me, right? So I'm the Matt. And then I think I say in that piece also, I learned it from the best, my old man, right? My Mexican father, who, by the way, downstairs right now watching my kids because my wife is in New York for a week. It's very challenging. But I think in working class neighborhoods, I think often young boys are taught to sort of build a wall between them and their emotions. And even in that picture book, I'm kind of exploring that territory when I say, soon you'll see your sport for what it really is, an expression. And that's, to me, what sports really are. It's a way of, it's some boys, that's their art. So yeah, I think education is such a key in terms of turning that around. Nobody in my family had been to college. And when I got there, I saw a different way. I saw a different way to navigate life. And it just like it was an awakening. And I love San Diego State for that very reason, that there are a lot of first generation students there. And it's so fun to watch them have that revelation in their own way. So thanks, Tyler. Thanks for your question.
All right, great question, Tyler. I wanted to sneak a question here from one of my students, and this is a question for April. So April, in my class, we read your great short story, I'll Take It From Here, Thanks. So she wanted to know a little bit about what prompted you to write it, and if there was a particular reason why you had many allusions to dogs in the story.
Sorry, that's me trying to use a mouse with my left hand. Why are there so many dogs in the story? You know what? Embarrassingly, there's just a lot of dogs in my fiction, and they perform all sorts of functions. And I'm just, if I were embarrassable, I would do something about it, but I just let the dog stay. So I don't know where the dogs are, but the impetus for it, I mean, that's actually I gave it to you as a story, but it's really a chapter in my book. So the whole book is about this woman having this baby, and that's just the one chapter. I mean, part of the weirdness that I think you don't know when you read that story is that the baby she just gave birth to ends up being a guy she went to high school with reincarnated. So if you read the whole book, that story is a different kind of weird than when you just read the story. So I don't know if maybe that just makes the whole question go away. Why did I write it? I just needed the birth scene. But also, I don't know, actually, let me go back. I guess part of that book, and my purpose of writing that book, was just this idea of, I feel like, I don't know if it's women or women in writing, I just felt like it seems like there's some resistance to just writing about having a baby, as if it's a miraculous enough thing to be a plot all on its own. You know, it's just like, I finally wanted to sit here and be like, isn't that enough? Do I need anything else to be happening? And then more importantly, even as I was writing it, and this is funny because the same things that I felt when I was writing it were the things that I felt as a person who was giving birth. So giving a birth, you're like, I'm not going to be alone in the room, am I? And I'm writing it, and I'm like, she's not going to be alone in the room, is she? And then that's the very subject of the story. The story is, because this is my experience, you know, you go into a birth and a person's going to come out of you. I think you guys all know that. I'm not a science teacher, but that's just what I offer you here tonight. But you go in there, and especially if you go in there with someone you know, and they think their job is to calm you down. And you're like, look, there's no way to calm me down. Something insane is about to happen to me. And I forbid anyone to sit in that room who's going to make it feel like it's not insane and any less wild than it is. And so I feel like sometimes, I don't know if this is an American thing or a human thing, and it's probably overall, it's a helpful thing, right? We try to help each other by making things seem manageable. But that story is about the beauty and the unmanageableness. What if you go in and you have birth and no one's sitting there telling you, oh, honey, this is okay. Women do this. What if you just sit there and you're like, oh my God, what? I came in here as one person and I'm leaving as two people. Like, what happened that's not enough to just write about that and nothing else and no other characters, no other thing, just that's weird enough. So I guess that particular chapter, in a way, I guess I'm coming back to kind of liking this question. That particular chapter, what that does, that the whole book is trying to do, is just say, isn't motherhood itself a story?
Thank you for providing that additional context. And we need to get the full sense of weird, so everybody get the book. Let's see, I think Viviana was next in our queue of questions.
My question sort of got answered, but honestly, I'll ask it anyway. It's a question for Matt de la Peña. So I kept following this. I'm in Professor Marshall's class, so I read the section that you sent her. Very well written, thank you. And there, I kept coming back to this experience that I think some people have where as a minority or as someone from a lower class, sometimes you get sort of saved by these families who are better off. And so I just wanted to ask if that was an autobiographical situation, or if you just know about that experience, sort of how it entered your writing was my question.
Yeah, that's like pure autobiography. And yeah, for me, one of the most fascinating parts of my life is looking back at when I was a younger person and having these savior people in my world, right? So, somebody brought up that line earlier of the mother from the wealthy family saying, you can ask us for help, right? And I don't have myself answer that, because to me that's fascinating, just that question. So yeah, I love that territory. I think, like Blas said earlier, I'm just writing the same story again and again from different angles. Sometimes it's a novel, sometimes that's actually from a middle grade novel that I'm writing, but I'm gonna obviously take myself out of it and make it a character. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating territory. I always tell students, I don't think you should go into any book or story or poem with a message, but you do go in with a point of view. And I kind of have a very consistent point of view, something I'm trying to work out. So thank you for your comment.
All right, thanks, Viviana. I think we have time just for a couple additional questions. So let's go with Danielle.
My question is for April. Do you think it's possible to balance motherhood and writing? Or I guess a better way to ask it is, how have you managed to balance both?
Wow, there's a big assumption in that question. I don't know what you can see from your screen, but balance is not a word I use in this household. That's something that happens in the future. There's not balance here. Unless somehow my kid's walking through the room with a cleaning supply in one hand and something that's healthy for her and not made out of processed cheese in the other. I mean, I don't know if you do balance it. What I do know is that, I know a lot of women, and I'm sure some of these other writers who have been around for a while do as well, where this weird thing seems to happen, where a book and a baby will come at the same time. And not just a book, but like your first book or a big book. And, it seems like just a coincidental thing until you're a person who has a baby and you realize there's this insane cosmic energy that fills your body. And you start to realize or believe that 100%, if you're a creative person and you're a writer, that energy is available to you to make something other than a baby. Like there's just excess baby energy there. So I don't actually think if you look at these women, I can't tell you how many women I've talked to, and they're like, oh, that exact thing happened to me. And I don't know if it's that you're pregnant, you have this energy and it helps your book. I don't know what the connection is there, but what I do know is this: you cannot become a mother and then try to be the same writer that you were before, or that's just a disastrous proposition. And this is probably true of anything, but when you just get a whole bunch of new information with a child, and like, you have to talk about that new information and new energetic information. I mean, one thing that's interesting is you realize pretty early on when you're pregnant that what morning sickness is, it's not about your stomach. It's that another energy system is in your energy system. I mean, another person's is being made. It's not, I don't even think it's anything about actual nausea. It's just like someone else is here with you. I mean, those couple lines in that story that you guys read, it's like, what, you're sitting here and you realize I'm sharing a shadow. Like, we're the same shadow. It's not that you're in front of it. We're the same shadow. We're the same appetite. And so what I think is really dangerous, actually, is a whole lot of women in this country, women writers, who decide that, oh, that's something that slows me down. I have to write around that, right? I'm gonna just try to manage the thing with the baby as best I can so I can get my energy together and go back to my writing. And it's like, really, you're gonna ignore that kind of energy? You're gonna ignore that information? Because ignore that at your peril. That is everything you ever needed to know. So I think the better question is just, you have no choice. With a baby comes a new world. And if you're a writer, that's true if you're a writer as well. So it's just really tough though. I mean, how do you actually make time for it? How do you actually, I'm looking at Anna, a poet that was in one of my fiction classes. Anna, is that a child or a pet on your couch? I can't tell. But Anna knows this thing of like, you can't go back. You have to, it has to be part of your writing now, I don't know if that's helpful or even what your question was. Thank you though.
Thank you, April, for that very honest answer. I think we all appreciate it and needed it. All right, maybe a couple more. So is it Anna who has a question in the viewing party over at our niches? Okay, whoever has the question, if you want to go ahead and ask it.
Hi, everybody. This is for Sandra. And how do you create remorse for our ill treatment of the earth? I had just come to terms with the fallout, and along comes Rachel Carlson. I struggle with taking like a preacher's tone or being so didactic no one wants to hear me. So how do you not preach? And is it because you take the persona of the animals? That's my question.
Good question. It's, I think probably the worst thing, or at least the worst thing for me, is to I have to watch my temper. I don't have a temper about other things, but I have a real rage point when it comes to mistreatment. And I mean, it just instantly could go off on someone and manage not to. And so it drives me back deeper into the poem, to think about how to tell the story without having it simply be full of rage, and how to draw a reader into that story. Is there a particular poem? You were talking about the Rachel Carson, right?
Yeah. So it's like the ant hoisting his brother's body in the nest and said yes. Is it the yes? Like, is it the yes that
that was, I was reading everything. Rachel Carson, Frances Moore Lepay, Janine Benyus, these have all been lifetime, well, Janine's younger than I am, but long heroes of mine. And I was reading everything of hers. I was invited to do something for Symphony Space in New York that was focused on the Kennedy assassination. And it was the anniversary of what they called the death of Camelot. And so I knew that people would be taking the Kennedys. I first started with Jackie Kennedy, and there was nothing there for me. I couldn't do anything. And so that's when I thought, what else is going on in the news at this particular time? And this was when Rachel Carson had breast cancer. She was actually dying of breast cancer. And there was so much resistance to what she had done in her lifetime, all the facts that she had brought forward. And it was just starting to open. And that seemed like a way for me to celebrate something in the midst of all of the tragedy around the assassination of a president. and other readers in our country. So I prefer to celebrate if I can celebrate, but I think it's a really good question because it's tricky. And often I'll start out one way and just do 8 or 9 variations before I really get it going the way I want it to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Oh,
The one thing I want to say is that I know doesn't work, but I know the feeling of it is self-righteous indignation. At all.
well, I think it's helpful advice. I mean, especially considering the current moment and maybe wanting to write about certain situations, but needing some sense of restraint to not go in that direction of being too didactic so that we turn readers off.
Well, and if you're surrounded by conservation scientists and people who work in that area, there's a lot of talk about PTSD and so forth. And then a lot of the poems start to repeat themselves. And so at a certain point, it becomes difficult to figure out how to even enter a poem on this topic because there have been so many other poems done bemoaning the human condition and the human responsibility in this.
Right. I mean, I think that connects back to what Blas was saying earlier about finding that new way into this thing that you feel compelled to write about, continue to return to, and Matt as well, on your advice on that. All right, folks. Well, we are about at that point where we're going to become zombies, but I thought we would end with, if I could hear just a little bit from each of our faculty and answer to a question that a student had formulated over here in the chat. I'm going to shift it just a bit so that it's addressed to all of our authors. But she's new to the act of creative writing and was just kind of wondering if maybe each of you could talk a little bit about what your first experiences, emotions, or approaches were to putting something down on the page, like a first draft. She says that she feels fear, urgency, love, and stillness. She's wondering if that's typical, and maybe you could just each talk a little bit about, your emotional experience, what it's like to first get something down onto the page. How are you feeling? How are you reacting? I don't know. I mean, Sandra, you're up on my screen still. So if you want to begin with you.
Okay.
No pressure.
I don't have that problem. If things are going well with writing, then the associative mind just kicks out one idea after another idea after another idea. The problem I have is then at the end of, because we're constantly jumping into various responsibilities, meetings and classes and conferences and so forth. So I'll be very excited about an idea, but by the time I actually get to it 3 weeks later, I'll look at it and I'll go, what a stupid idea. Why did you think that was exciting? So I envy you being in that place where you can actually just sit down and think it through and feel excited about it.
Thank you, Sandra. Matt, I see you next. Do you want to share a little bit about that first experience?
Sure. Well, I do remember being a new MFA and I had just a massive case of imposter syndrome. I think like I hadn't read enough, why would anyone want to read my stories? There's all this slang in there. So it was this incredible imposter syndrome, turning in the first story to a workshop. But I also felt that incredible imposter syndrome as a critiquer in workshop. Like I was scared to offer my opinion because I just didn't think I could be right. And there were so many smart people around me. So I think that first year I was just very quiet and taking it all in. And I think that's pretty natural. And then, you get out of the program or you get further into the program and you start to have a little confidence, but you don't know about the publishing world yet. And there's a freedom in that moment because you don't know all the politics around the publishing industry. I'm married to a publicist now, but I wasn't at the beginning of my career. And I didn't know when awards were announced. I didn't know any of that stuff. And then, I got married to one, and she alerts me to all these things and gives me all this anxiety now. So I think there's a sweet spot. It's like after you get over the imposter syndrome and you start to really go for it, but you still don't know about what awaits you on the other side. That's the most beautiful space. And then hopefully once you have a career, you can kind of find that again on the other side. Whatever that looks like, it's different for every writer.
Great. Thank you, Matt. April, I see you're next in my little queue here.
That's how long it takes me to unmute. Okay. The question was about how to get through all the initial stuff.
Yeah, or just your general kind of emotional response to beginning to formulate a piece, which I guess you've begun to formulate this new piece. So perhaps you're in a good space to speak about that.
I find it kind of frustrating and horrifying because in the beginning, it's like this log jam. I have so many more ideas than I can get on the page in an orderly fashion, right? I guess I would just say this. Don't let that feeling hang too long before. The answer is just, you just got to start writing. Like part of that is, there is a cotton candy element in the beginning to you have these great bursts of inspiration. But that's not where that might be the beginning of something great, but everybody who gets anywhere realizes that it becomes great because of your hours in the chair and the work you do down at the end of the line. So I actually have this, it's sort of like this thing of, I'm always thinking of analogies to real life. So, when you're younger, let's say you keep meeting these people and falling in love and it doesn't work out. And so you meet one of these people and you fall in love and you have that horrible feeling because it feels great. And you're like, this isn't going to work out. I have that experience when I have I'm really excited about some idea and I can see it before I've written it and it's perfect. But I know when I try and get it down, it will not be delivered in that manner. As surely as I know this person I'm staring at that I'm madly in love with is probably a lot like these other people I was in love with and that didn't work out either. And there's that feeling of, I know this isn't what I think it is, but I can't do anything about that in relationships. And with writing, what I know is that, I think it is like falling in love. There's a false front to it. But I know I have to write my way through it. That false front, just like when you have a family, it attracts me to it. It makes me get the initial work down, right? But if you want to have a family or anything that endures, that's the long haul, right? So it's the thing of you fall in love and it's magical, but that's not going to keep you with someone for 30 years. So yeah, I have this great idea for this novel, but don't be fooled, like that honeymoon period will end. And then frankly, the thing that little bit of magic you felt at the beginning, if you go all the way, it might be there at the very end again. The way those couples that stay together for 90 years. I don't know if you guys, I'm always interested in this because I feel like there's some kind of graph where it's like at some point there's 10 or 20 years where you're like, woo, I wouldn't want to be anywhere in your house. But if you guys get through those 20 years, I know that 10 or 20 after, you're going to experience something that other people don't have. So it's this thing of different kinds of love. I feel like there's some kind of analogy to the different kinds of depths that you experience with writing and that when your book actually becomes something true.
Thank you, April. That was a beautiful analogy. And then Blas, you want to bring us home?
Sure. I think maybe it's different for different genres, but for me, I'll be writing and there's nothing to it. There's nothing interesting, nothing exciting. And then something happens. I don't know what it is, just some way that the words are speaking to one another, some sort of figurative language. And I can tell I've moved into some new territory. I'm now in poetry world and it feels, to me, that's just kind of thrilling. It is like love, falling in love, but I think it feels like I'm in touch with a part of myself that's always been there, but I don't always have access to, when I'm, doing laundry or cooking or teaching or whatever. It's a quieter self. So that always thrills me. And when I'm in that zone, getting there is really hard, but then when I'm there, I'm so happy. I just want to be there and explore it for as long as I can. And I think I was just thinking about this question. It's such a big question. I think that part of it is, when I first started writing, I was trying to really understand myself, trying to understand who I was. And so writing became a way of kind of quieting down and just listening to the quietest voice underneath all of the fear and the jealousy and the anger and all of those other feelings that were kind of getting in the way. And it was the place I went to when I wanted to understand something, and I knew that I wasn't going to get the right answer from my parents or from a teacher or from a book. And so that remains true now, that I feel really guided by that space when I'm able to get there. And so that is most important to me. It's more important than a finished poem. It's more important than a publication. It's more important than anyone liking it. It's being able to get in touch with that part of myself. So I think that's, all these other things are so great and so wonderful. And I want those too, but really, like, I write because I like to write. When I'm writing well. When I'm writing poorly, then I hate it. So anyway, how's that?
Well, thank you, Blas. I think that's a wonderful place to close. This act of writing is sort of quieting down. I want to thank all of our faculty for reading and sharing their time with us tonight. Sandra, Matt, Blas, and April. Wonderful. Thanks for kicking off our semester series in such a great way. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, for your wonderful questions. And please join us next week, same time, same place, for another author who is also an SDSU MFA program alum, Tara Stillians-Whitehead. Hope to see you then at some of our other events happening on Zoom this semester. And until then, get home safely. Don't injure yourself as you leave whatever room you're Zooming from. And we'll see you all again soon.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye. Thank you.